All right. So we were talking about stagflation, and there's a relation between inflation and employment rate, which I've loosely covered here. It's known as Phillips curve. Okay. So it means that uh, in the previous session we were discussing that some amount of inflation is desirable in a society, in an economy, and it also leads to increase in the employment. More people are employed because there is a growth. So Phillips curve precisely tells us about that. It says that the inflation has an inverse relation to the unemployment rate, which means that in an economy, if there is inflation, it is inversely proportional, or if there is high inflation, then there would be less unemployment or more people are employed. Okay. The reason is because uh, inflation usually happens when demand is much more than supply. No? That's another way of saying that too much money is chasing too less of goods. Okay, so the demand is more, which means that more people have to be employed to work. So it means that employment rate rises. Okay, and of course, in an economy, wherever there is growth, there is some amount of inflation. So, as a usual relation, inflation increases, which means that employment is also rising. But there is a special case of inflation, which is known as stagflation. It is made up of two different words, which is stagnation and inflation. This usually happens when there is a high inflation, along with it, there is a recession. Okay, we discussed what is recession. It is also known as degrowth. Okay, it is two consecutive quarters of negative GDP. Now, how does this happen? Okay, usually whenever GDP is growing uh, and there is growth in the economy, there is some amount of inflation. Okay, now it happens sometimes that uh, the inflation has reached such high levels that persistent and quite high inflation, it actually leads to less demand because now people think that the goods have become costly, so they don't want to go to the market and make consumption purchases. Okay. Due to this, eventually over time, the producers who are producing these goods, they feel that there is no one who is purchasing their products, so they also try to cut down on the production. Otherwise, things would keep lying in the inventory and nobody would be purchasing them. So what happens due to this over time? There is a tendency towards recession, and consequently, the producers also do cost cutting because earlier they were employing four people for the same work. Now it can be done by just one person. So they would just cut down the jobs for the remaining three people. And when this happens, it becomes a vicious cycle, which is really difficult to come out of because the inflation is also high, recession is also high, and unemployment also increases. This is in contrast to the Phillips curve, which is the usual rule which says that with inflation, unemployment will also come down. Okay. And this cannot be tackled by the conventional methods. Why? Because what do we do usually when there is inflation? What does RBI or any central bank do? They will increase the rates. Now, in this case, if you increase the rate, you know, there is already less consumption. So it will further lead to more recession. Okay, and you cannot decrease the rate because if you decrease the rates, there is already unemployment. Already people are not in the jobs, and decreasing the rate, which means giving more money in the hands of people, they will demand, but there is no supply because again the economy is in recession. So this cannot be tackled by the conventional methods. And often in these kinds of cases, what the government has to do, they have to take some strict measures, and they have to tackle at least one thing. So for example, when we were faced with not exactly stagflation, it would be wrong to say that we were in a stagflation situation, but when Dr. Rajan had taken, over the position of governor of the RBI, we were already facing high inflation. Those were the days of UPA too. and it was there was not a recession, but the economy was slowly recovering from the 2008 crisis. So the growth was slow, it was slowly picking up, and of course there was a huge rate in unemployment. So Dr. Rajan had two big demands to tackle. So to curb the inflation or to curb the unemployment. So he decided, because he cannot do both of them with the same tool. So he decided to put unemployment and growth at on the back burner for some time and target inflation, because if you do not target inflation, then it can lead to situations of hyperinflation. And you know that how hyperinflation is not the best thing to you know to happen. Okay, so these are the terminologies. Okay, now it is important to put up a break here. Okay, so these were the various terminologies related to inflation. Okay, deflation, disinflation, recession, stagflation, hyperinflation. Of course, there are many such terminologies. You know, uh, it's an economist paradise, but we don't have to delve into that. These are the terms which might be asked in the exam, but looking at the previous papers, there is also lesser chances for these. Okay, one important thing is headline inflation versus the core or underlying inflation. Okay, this is another way of classifying inflations. Now, it is as simple as that. So, whenever we are, and this would make more sense when we talk about the indices like CPI and WPI. But what usually happens when you are targeting inflation, uh, yeah, you are basically quantifying it using some of the indices. Uh, so, there are certain, you know, commodities in the economy which can actually give you a very skewed up picture, because these are known as volatile commodities and their prices fluctuate. They can be uh, things like crude oil. Okay, so for example, in case of a war between Russia and Ukraine and the Israel Palestine, so there is a huge rise in the prices of crude oil. Okay, during COVID also, there were supply chain disruptions. There were logistic disruptions, because of which the prices of crude oil, fuel, they were on the rise. And similarly, directly dependent on it and also independently, there are some seasonal products. Okay, let us say, the seasonal products for fruits and vegetables. For example, due to a poor monsoon, or due to unexpected monsoon, the the growth of onions was, the production of onions was destroyed. So what will happen? There would be lesser onions available as a supply side. So the demand for onions would be increasing, and of course it would lead to inflation for onions. So these are the volatile and seasonal products. If you include them in the counting of inflation, then they give us a very bloated picture. So whenever we are talking about headline inflation, it takes a total measure, but a more refined way of tackling this is the core inflation. So whenever RBI is tackling it, and we will see it soon, that the Monetary Policy Committee, it measures the CPI. CPI is the Consumer Price Index. Okay, for the combined. We will see what combined means, and they tackle it at core level. Okay, so the logic behind this is that RBI has to focus on the demand side. Now inflation is the next topic is causes of inflation. So I just want to let you know that inflation happens from two sides. This is the supply side shock, when the supply of certain things like the crude oil or the seasonal vegetables is disrupted. But instead of focusing on the supply side, we have to focus on the demand side of inflation, because that is where the technical definition comes from. Too much money chasing too less products. Okay, if there is a supply shock, and if it is only for specific things like volatile or seasonal products, then that can be dealt away with in a different way. For example, the government can put up a notice saying that you cannot stockpile onions, you cannot do black marketing or hoarding of onions. So there are other ways to do so. But when RBI is focusing, if they start focusing on supply side, they would be opening up a Pandora's box. So they would be tackling too many issues at the same time, which is not practical. Okay, so this is the difference between headline and core, and we always talk about core inflation to remove the effectivities of these volatile and seasonal products. Okay, so far so good. We are just talking about the theory and the what all comprises inflation. It looks like a difficult topic, but trust me, it is one of the most interesting topics and not that difficult. Okay, now about the causes of inflation. There are two kinds of causes. The first is demand pull inflation. This is when inflation is pulled by the demand shock. Okay, now how does that happen? Let us say, what are the underlying reasons for it. Let us say the simplest reason is too much money in the hands of people. Okay, that's the definition we are living by. So how does this happen? Demand has increased. Why? Because growth has increased. Okay, people have got their appraisals because the economy is doing good. Okay, there is a rise in income. Okay, it's a good agricultural produce. The monsoon was at the perfect time, so we have the perfect stock of agricultural produce. So there is rise in farmers' income. Okay, all the commodities, it's everything is rosy, hunky and dory. Okay, the second is when there is a RBI. What it does, it follows a dovish stance, or easy money policy or expansionary policy to put up money in the hands of people. So all of these are the fear, then we have excess of foreign inflows, forex increases. Okay, there is a fiscal expansion. For example, there is a populist government which comes into picture and it says, "Okay, we will give free electricity to all the people. We will give free food, free ration, free amenities, free daru." So what happens? People have a lot of money in their hands, you know, uh, and they start spending it, and it leads to inflation. Then there are welfare schemes by the government again, populist and welfare schemes. We can just club them. So populist or welfare schemes. So all of these have a tendency to uh, cause inflation. Then there is a cost pull inflation. It is also known as supply shock. Why supply shock? Because here inflation is pulled by not by the demand in the economy but by the supply. How does it happen? Let us say again there is a war. We have already discussed it. We are just trying to wind up the topic. So in cases of war, okay, epidemics, there is a crude oil disruption. Arab Spring happened in 2011 and all those years. Then there is that Arab region is always volatile. The Gulf Cooperation Council countries which are producing oil. Then there is a Russia-Ukraine war, a threat to cut down the supplies of natural gas and all those things. So these can cause. Then there is bad monsoon, so agriculture goes down. Okay, or you know uh, lack of storage facilities. It can also happen due to technology. For example, India produced a lot of tomatoes and onions this year. And monsoon was perfect, quite good. But these are perishable items. So of course, and it takes time and logistics to transport them from the fields to the from the farms to the plate of the customer. And during that time, we need cold storage facilities. We need containers. We need better trucking facilities, and they are not available. As a result, these uh, crops and these productivity they get destroyed. So what will happen? It will be perishable item. There was a very popular scene, image around 2014-15 when the farmers had their tomato crops destroyed and perished. So they just started throwing them on the road, dumping on the highways, and it created a visual scene. So all of these supply shock. Then there is underproductivity. There are not enough port facilities or not enough roads facilities. Uh, this is why. the government had started the ease of doing business measures. Why? Because if the country has better business opportunities, you have better warehouses and storage capabilities, you would be able to tackle the cost pull if inflation. You know, the inflation which is pulled due to cost of the or raw materials or cost of the factors of production. Okay, again it's getting very crowded, so I will draw a line here. Okay, we have discussed Phillips curve. Moving ahead, now we will talk about how to measure this inflation. So we have talked about all the theory and everything. Now we will talk about measures of inflation. So there are certain indices we create in an economy. How do we determine whether the uh, prices of goods and services have risen? So there are certain indices we create. The first indice is something we have studied in the first chapter, which is known as the GDP deflator. So, and then we have WPI and CPI, which we will discuss here. So what happens with GDP deflator? Just a revision. We know that the GDP, which the gross value of goods and services, which we calculate in a financial or production year, it is known as the nominal GDP because it is being calculated at the price of current year. Okay, so this nominal GDP is a product of price and quantity of current year. Okay, GDP is this only. Let us say in a simple economy, we are only able to produce onions, and we are able to produce 100 onions, and the price of each onion production is 10 rupees. So it becomes 100 into 10. Okay, but to find the real GDP, to ward off the effects of inflation, we have to calculate it at the base year. Okay, base year is an year which we have chosen, on which we calculate the prices of these goods and services. And usually, the criteria to choose a base year is that it is a relatively what we call in economics as a normal year. Okay, what do you mean by a normal year? It means that there were no extraordinary events or circumstances in that year. No failure of monsoon, no failure of production, no epidemic, no wars. So it was a year which is a good case, textbook example of how production should happen. So, and the prices were relatively stable. Okay, prices are never stable, but relatively they were stable as compared to other years. So this is how we choose the base year. For example, for GDP and all other purposes, our base year currently is 2011 and 12, and usually government appoints some committee to decide when to change this year, and it is periodically revised. Why is it revised? Because there are certain goods and services which enter into the market. For example, uh, the production of modern graphic processors and chips which can sustain the AI revolution, they were not available 30 years back. And there were certain things like pagers and typewriters which are not available today, but they were available 30 years back. So you cannot choose the base year the same every time. So it has to take into account all of this, and of course the fact that the price changes become drastic, you have to take into account. So this is why base year changes. Anyways, coming back. So uh, this is one definition which is mentioned by Ashok sir in his PPT, but I believe it is just a simplistic assumption, not a correct definition. Uh, it says that the difference between nominal GDP and real GDP is inflation. I would say it is more of an indication of how inflation has affected it, because if you subtract these two equations, nominal, real from nominal, then it would be a difference between these prices multiplied by the quantity. So, it is basically an indication of how, what is the gap which inflation has created between the nominal and real GDP, but it is not exactly a measure of inflation. How to measure the inflation? For that, we have the GDP deflator. And what that is, it is nominal GDP upon real GDP into 100. So basically, it tells us what is the percentage by which, or what is the factor by which the real GDP, which is GDP without, or after removing the uh, assumptions of inflation, how it has changed the nominal picture, no, the inflated picture. Okay, the reason why it is called a deflator, what exactly is deflator? If I talk in Hindi, it means hawa nikalna. Okay, so we have a deflator for our car tires. Okay, so when the tire pressure is quite too much, then we use it to release some air, from the tire to reduce the pressure. So in a similar way, this nominal figure is a bloated representation of the GDP. Why? Because it has taken into account the uh, inflation. So when we use the deflator, we are basically reducing that effect and calculating the real picture which would have been there in the absence of inflation. So this is which is why this is known as a measure of inflation, GDP deflator. Again, inflation rate. Please don't get confused between these two things. This is actually the measure of inflation. Okay, uh, measure of inflation, and this is the measure of change of inflation. Okay, so let us say this year inflation is at 4%, and last year it was at 5%. So there is a change of about, if I'm not wrong, it's 20%, right? So there's a reduction of 20% inflation between the 2 years. And this is how you calculate it. It's simple arithmetic, y2 minus y1 upon y1 into 100. Okay, so that's the change in inflation. All right. Now, to conclude about the GDP deflator, what are the advantages of it? What are the disadvantages or limitations of it? So this is like the most comprehensive measure of inflation. Why do you call it comprehensive? Because when you will see next that we are comparing it with WPI and CPI, we are talking about a basket of products. But what is GDP deflator? It is a measure of the change of difference between nominal and real GDP. Now recall, GDP is the sum total of all the goods and services in the economy. So which means that it is taking up the change in price effects of all the goods and services. So it is the is in the most comprehensive measure of inflation which we have. Now, if that's the case, then why do we even need WPI and CPI? This is the best thing. You are able to calculate everything, and you don't even have to make any extra efforts. No, no extra surveys, because GDP तो हमने calculate कर ही लिया ना. We already have the GDP figure. You just have to you know ward off the effect of inflation from it. So it is, if you talk in terms of manpower, just imagine the amount of manpower and resources and money and time it takes to calculate WPI and CPI every month. Okay, the reason is because this data is not available in real time. We know that GDP data always comes up with a lag, and first there are advanced estimates, then there are revised estimates, and inflation is something which has to be tackled in real terms. So if I'm facing a situation of inflation today as a governor of RBI or as a prime minister, I cannot wait for the GDP data to come after 6 months and then act on it, then start acting on it, So this is why it is not useful in the short term, for decision making. So that's the disadvantage of it. Now, talking about other measures, there is a measure, producer price index. Okay, it is used in countries like the USA, but currently it is not measured in India, and so I've put it up in the box. There is a recommendation. There is a committee by B.N. Goldar. It submitted its report in 2017. Not at all important for the exam, but they just recommended that we should have a, PPI. What does it measure? Producer price index. There are two measures for it. One is the output PPI and second is the input PPI. It measures the uh, price index. So let us, we will talk about price index later. So it measures the change, or the inflation which is coming up due to at the producer level. So what is the producer level? This is the first level of activity in the economy. If you talk of the primary producer, it is the farmers and agriculturalists, and if you talk about manufacturing sector, then it is the raw material which has come up before it has been processed. Okay, before it reaches wholesale and retail and finally the consumer. So this is the measure of inflation at the first level. So currently we do not have it. That's why it is not important. Not talking much about it, but it will be important. The reason we have discussed is because when we have to draw a contrast between WPI and CPI, then PPI is important as a reference. Okay, and what are the advantages of it? Why do we want it in India? It is already too late that we don't have it. It's because if if the inflation is due to cost pull, supply shock, crude oil, okay, bad monsoon, lack of storage, war, epidemics, it can be detected at a very early stage and arrested right there if we have the data for PPI, because this is at the producer's level. Okay. And one more advantage of this is that this is at the initial stage, so it does not contain, it's a very pure form of measurement. It does not contain the impurities of taxation, logistics, all those things come up as value is getting added. Okay, so this is the raw material at its original source. So if you are able to arrest inflation here, then the trickle down effect would be much lower. Anyways, coming down to the measure which we have, wholesale price index. Uh, I have put up a lot of theory here. Okay. I'm not sure if it is, this is not important. It is published by the economic advisor. Okay. So the economic advisors are important, but this information is not important for the exam. मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ कॉमर्स एंड इंडस्ट्री के का ऑफिस है इकोनॉमिक एडवाइजर का, usually headed by an IAS, and so this is produced with a month lag. So it is produced every month. So for the month of May, it would be published in June. Okay, and the base year for this is 2012. Now it is important to understand what is WPI, what is wholesale price index, or what is index. So what index does is I have to measure the inflation. I have two different ways, points at which I can measure the general increase and decrease in the prices of items. The first is at the level of wholesale. When the uh, goods are just produced, just finished, or they are still in the intermediate stage. This is important for industrialists and businessmen because they are purchasing goods from the wholesale market. And the second is I am measuring inflation at the consumer level, so which is the retail level. Okay. Now, how do you measure? Do you take all the items which are being used in the wholesale market or which are popular in the wholesale market? No, you just take a sample, a representative basket, which is uh, representative enough. It is, comprehensive enough that it gives you a general idea that if the items in this basket are facing a price increase, it means that definitely you are going to face a price increase. Okay. Uh, we can explain it using a term which is known as thalinomics. It was uh, introduced by the economic survey. It was about how the plate, price of a plate of plate, thali means plate in Hindi. So a representative plate of having a balanced diet by a common person, how this price is changing, and that can indicate. So let us say I have some chapati, some rice, some dal, some pulses, some vegetables, some curd, some milk based products, and if I'm able to determine the change in the price of that thali 10 years back and today, then I would be able to determine what is the actual inflation which I'm facing, how costly or how cheaper this thali is now proving out for me. So this is the meaning of index. And this wholesale price index is measured for a basket of 676 items every month. Okay. There are three main categories here. And if you check this presentation by sir, I think, yeah, this one. So he has mentioned the a representative basket. So you can see that almost 65% of this, and these numbers have changed, but the numbers are not important. You just need to know that the primary constituent of this is food, non-food, and minerals. Again, please note that this food of WPI is very much different from the food of CPI. So in CPI, let us say for the urban public, when we are measuring CPI, the urban public has more access to money. It is relatively well off than the rural or agricultural labor. So their plate is more consisting of items like protein or pulses as compared to the poor's plate, the poor man's plate, which contains more items like the coarse cereal, okay, or rice, okay. So which is why the food which is being discussed here is the food at the wholesale level. So, this would not talk about imported items like avocados. It would not talk about, the pulses which we are importing from outside. So, this would talk about the food production at the wholesale level in the country, domestic. So, it does not talk about imports. So, this food is different from the food which is counted in CPI in terms of composition, not in terms of the food remains the same, but the composition changes. Similarly, for non-food items and for minerals. Now, minerals is not something which is measured in CPI because it's not every day that you are going out and purchasing manganese or cobalt. Cobalt nobody purchases; it's radioactive. But manganese and all such minerals, you are not producing, purchasing them. You are purchasing the finished products which might contain those minerals. Okay. Secondly, it is fuel and power. Again, fuel here would consist of something like crude oil. But when you're talking about CPI, it would be the refined petroleum which you're putting in your cars or the diesel. It would not talk about crude oil or petroleum jelly. Okay. Similarly, for the power sector, power here would talk about the electricity which you get, electricity tariff which you are paying at the industrial level. So there is a difference between the electricity tariff you pay as a retail, as a society holder or as a resident citizen, and as an industrialist. So that changes. And then about uh, so the major chunk is manufactured products. I'm sorry, I just read that pie chart differently. The green part is manufactured products, 60%, and then 20% is primary articles, and again another 15% is fuel and power. Okay. Now going back to our notes, yeah, we have already noted that. Now, what are the features or the advantages of it? WPI has an all India character. I'll use a red marker. Yeah, so it has an all India character. Why does it have an all India character? It's because the wholesale prices are constant at the level of production. Uh, we have introduced a new WPI series so that it does not include the indirect taxes and the cost of logistics. This step has made it much more closer to PPI. So initially, earlier, what was the case that if you are measuring WPI in Uttar Pradesh versus in Kerala, then due to the differences in the state taxes and the excise and customs and VATs and everything, these the wholesale price of crude oil would be different, and it is still different for the oil and petroleum, but let us say about minerals, it would be different. But now we have removed this indirect taxes, so this count is much closer to the PPI thing, which we do not have in India. So it has an all India character. It is calculated at point to point in an year. For example, if you are comparing the WPI for October 2015, you will compare it with October of 2014 and not the January of 2014. The reason being because India is primarily an agricultural economy even today, uh, and even in the case of manufacturing, so things change according to seasonality. There's a peak season of spending, so there is a peak season of manufacturing as well. Then there are some agricultural seasons, the harvesting of rabi and kharif crops. So the economy shows some seasonality. That's the reason again why we are measuring core inflation as compared to headline inflation. Okay. Another thing is that it respects the seasonality factor. Okay, we have already discussed that. Now, what happens in off season? Let us say it's the mango season coming up. So WPI is going to measure the mangoes at wholesale in the food sector, in the in this primary articles, food. But what about October when mangoes are no more available? So this weight would be evenly distributed amongst other things. Or if there is a particular fruit or vegetable which is available in October, then its weight would be transferred to that according to the magnitude of production. So hence it also takes into account seasonality, and this is used to deflate. We are talking about GDP deflators, WPIs, and CPIs. All of these are measures of inflation, so they are also used to deflate the nominal values. Now ये WPI है, wholesale की बात कर रहे हैं, तो ये किसको deflate करेगा? It deflates the values of IIP, that's Index of Industrial Production. Uh, just one line explanation for this. What happens is India has classified 8 different industries as core industries, critical industries. Infrastructure status we have given to them, like cement, petroleum, logistics, and all those things. So the production in these 8 sectors roughly determines what we know as index of industrial production. Basically, it is a measure of how we are doing in terms of manufacturing sector. Okay, so that's the index which is there. It is not a part of syllabus. It is not at all important, but just to give you a perspective that since we are talking about WBI, it uses the GDP deflator analogy to deflate these values to arrive at real IIP as compared to nominal IIP. Okay. Now, what is important from the exam? This formula. You might have a question on this. WPI is the cost of basket. Let us say I'm talking about WPI for the May of 2024, then it would be the cost of basket in May 2024 versus the cost of same basket of products in the base period. So it would be the May of 2012 because our base year is 2012. Okay, multiplied by 100. As simple as that. The same formula holds for CPI. It's very logical. No need to memorize it. Just need to remember base say we would be dividing it and the current month of consideration is here. Now, what are the limitations? Uh, Despite all its features and benefits, its accuracy is not very satisfactory. It is still not able to, calculate or take into account the various vagaries of, inflation. So, which is why it does not give us a good picture. We cannot rely on it for policy making. It does not cover services. Okay, services like IT, infrastructure, finance services, insurance, business services, hotel, tourism, hospitality. All of these are not covered. And unorganized sector, which is 35% of the total manufacturing output, it is also not accounted for here. Okay, so these are the disadvantages. But again, for the wholesale sector, it is the measure of inflation. Coming to CPI, most of the things which we have covered in WPI remain the same. I need not explain again what is an index, why is it used, how the price indexes work, how these deflators are used to deflate the nominal values and convert them into real values. So we will talk about what CPI is. This is the inflation measurement at the retail or the consumer level. Okay, and because India has a lot of inequality, it does not have the same amount of consumers everywhere. It is measured in different, it has many sub indices. Okay, so there are roughly 4 indices. The first is for industrial workers, IW.